Before we begin, remember, every view keeps the shadows away. Subscribe, or she'll come looking for you tonight. Like this video, and maybe she'll spare your soul. The Nun Who Never Died. The town of St. Michael's had long since forgotten the old church that sat at the edge of the woods. Its doors had been chained, its stained glass shattered, and the bell tower leaned as if bowing to something unseen. The locals whispered about it only in hushed tones, warning children not to wander too close. But to three ambitious documentary filmmakers, it was the perfect setting for their next viral project. Miles, the director, had a hunger in his eyes. He wanted the kind of footage that would make people freeze in their chairs and click share without hesitation. Emma, the sound engineer, was skeptical but loyal. She had heard the stories, the failed exorcism, the nun who died screaming, the priest who vanished, but she had followed Miles into stranger places before. The third member, Jordan, the cameraman, didn't believe in ghosts. He only believed in the paycheck that Miles had promised once they sold the film. They arrived just before dusk. The church loomed against the sky, its walls blackened with rot and mildew. Crows circled above, their cries sharp as razors in the cold air. Miles unlocked the rusted gate with bolt cutters, and the clang of iron echoed far too loudly for a place that had been abandoned for 40 years. Inside, dust rose in thick clouds with every step. Pews lay overturned, hymnals torn apart by weather and time. The air was colder than outside, carrying a faint smell of iron, like old blood. Emma adjusted her headphones, her eyes darting nervously at the crucifix that still hung above the altar, though its figure of Christ was cracked and missing half a face. "Perfect," Miles whispered, his voice a mix of awe and greed. "This place is alive." Joe Ardan lifted the camera and began recording. The lens caught shafts of dying sunlight breaking through the shattered windows, illuminating spider webs and graffiti scrawled across sacred walls. He zoomed in on the altar, where the wood was split as though something had clawed its way out. Emma pressed a hand to her headset. "I'm picking up something," she said slowly. "A low hum. Could just be interference, but it's steady, like chanting." Miles grinned, eyes gleaming in the dim light. "That's our opening scene." They set up their equipment around the altar. Tripods, recorders, and motion sensors littered the holy ground, turning the church into a battlefield of technology against silence. For hours, nothing happened. The sun dipped, shadows stretched long across the cracked floor, and the cold deepened until they could see their breath. Then it began. Jordan was adjusting his lens when he froze. "Did you see that?" he asked, lowering the camera. "See what?" Emma asked. "There, by the pews, a woman dressed in white." Emma's skin prickled. She turned but saw only darkness. "You're imagining things." But when she lifted her headset again, the steady hum had shifted into whispers, words she couldn't understand, voices layered over one another like a chorus of the damned. Her chest tightened as the sound grew louder, pressing against her eardrums until she yanked the headphones off. "I swear I heard someone," she gasped. Miles leaned against the altar, smirking. "This is exactly what we need. Keep rolling." Jordan obeyed, sweeping the camera across the church. His hand shook as he zoomed in on the far corner. Through the flickering viewfinder, he caught a glimpse of something impossible. A nun's figure, half shrouded in shadow, her habit torn and smeared with dark stains. Her face was pale as bone, her lips frozen in a scream. "Jesus Christ," Jordan cursed, nearly dropping the camera. "She's here!" But when Miles and Emma turned, the corner was empty, only dust and silence.
"Check the playback," Miles said quickly. His voice trembled despite his attempt at control. Jordan rewound the footage, and there she was, the nun. Not a blur, not a trick of the light. Her face clear, her eyes wide and hollow, her body chained to the stone floor. Emma's stomach turned cold. "That can't be possible. She's been dead for decades." The church groaned as if in answer, wood splintering, the crucifix above the altar shaking on its nails. A sound broke through the silence then, 3 loud knocks on the floorboards directly beneath them. Each one rattled the equipment, sending echoes that reverberated through their bones. Miles stared at the spot where the nun had appeared on camera, his expression dark with both terror and fascination. "Do you know what this means? We've just uncovered the legend. She never left." Emma wanted to run. Every instinct in her body screamed to leave the church, abandon the film, and never look back. But Jordan kept recording, his breath shallow, the red light of the camera blinking like a heartbeat. And then, the temperature plummeted. Their breaths came in white clouds. Emma felt something icy press against her skin. She looked down at her arm and froze, a handprint, pale, wet, and cold, pressed firmly into her flesh. The whispers surged into screams. The camera flickered, and for a single frame the nun's face appeared again. Closer this time, her mouth stretched open wider than humanly possible, her eyes burning with rage. Emma screamed. Miles didn't move. His eyes were locked on the altar, where the chains rattled as if someone were still bound to them. "The exorcism," he whispered. It never ended. The church seemed to breathe around them. The wooden beams groaned, the wind whispered through the cracks, and the chains by the altar rattled with a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Emma clutched her arm, staring. At the pale handprint burned into her skin. It felt cold, as if ice water flowed through her veins. "I'm not staying here," she said, her voice trembling. "Whatever this is, it's real. We have to leave." But Miles only stepped closer to the altar, eyes wide, almost glowing with manic excitement. "Don't you get it? This is bigger than anything we've ever done. This nun, she's not just a legend. She's still here. If we capture this on film, it's history. It's immortality." Jordan lowered the camera for a moment, his hands slick with sweat. "Immortality doesn't mean anything if we don't survive. That thing is not supposed to exist." As if mocking him, the whispers surged again, weaving through the church in layers of different voices. They weren't speaking English, Latin perhaps, or something older, the syllables twisting and breaking against the air like shattered glass. Emma covered her ears, but it didn't stop. The voices slid into her mind, cold and invasive, making her stomach twist. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the voices, the heavy slam of a door. All three spun toward the church entrance. The massive wooden doors, which they had left wide open, were now shut tight. Iron locks sealed across the frame, though none of them had touched them. "We're locked in," Jordan whispered. His voice cracked under the weight of the words. Miles, however, was unmoved. He lifted his flashlight and approached the altar, sweeping the beam across the cracked stone floor. That's when they saw it. Faint carved symbols etched into the stone, circling the chains. Holy symbols, scorched into the ground like brands. Some were broken, others smeared as though clawed apart. "This is where they tried to exorcise her," Miles said, kneeling to trace a finger over one of the marks. "They bound her here. They chained her. But the ritual, it failed." Emma shook her head. "Failed? No. So, something worse. What if it never finished? What if she's been stuck here all this time?" The thought chilled them more than the air ever could. The nun hadn't simply died. She had been caught in between, her soul trapped in endless torment, her body perhaps never fully dead. A sudden crash shattered the silence. One of the pews toppled on its own, skidding across the floor as though shoved by invisible hands. Dust exploded into the air, choking them. Jordan raised the camera instinctively, and through the dust he caught another glimpse. The nun, crawling across the floor in the background, her chains dragging behind her. "Do you see her?" he shouted, but when the others turned, the space was empty. Emma staggered backward, pressing her back against the wall. Her breaths came fast and shallow, eyes darting everywhere. "She's not just appearing on camera anymore. She's here, with us." And then, the temperature dropped further still. Frost spread across the windows, white tendrils crawling over the broken glass. Their equipment began to fail, The recorder sputtered, the motion sensors blinked wildly, and Emma's headphones screamed with static so sharp it made her ears bleed. Through the static came words, clear, chilling, in English this time. "Stay with me." Emma ripped the headset off and hurled it across the floor. She spoke to me." Miles turned, his voice trembling now despite his bravado. "What did she say?" "She wants us to stay." The church seemed to laugh then, the sound of the wind twisting through the rafters into something almost human. Jordan's flashlight flickered, and for a brief second the beam landed on the crucifix above the altar. The cracked statue of Christ was no longer broken. His face had reformed, but twisted, his eyes gouged out, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The camera whirred, capturing everything, but Jordan could barely hold it steady. His teeth chattered, and sweat dripped into his eyes despite the freezing air. "Why is she showing us this?" Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Because," Miles said, his eyes locked on the crucifix, "she doesn't want us to leave. She wants witnesses." The whispers surged again, rising into shrieks, and then silence, deafening, suffocating silence. And in that silence, the sound of dragging chains began, slow, heavy, coming from the shadows beyond the altar. The nun appeared at last, not in fleeting glimpses, but fully, horribly real. Her habit hung in tatters, stained with blood that never dried. Chains clung to her wrists and ankles, digging into her decaying flesh. Her mouth was still open in that eternal scream, but now it moved, her voice a guttural rasp that made the floor tremble. The exorcism never ended. Emma screamed and stumbled backward. Jordan dropped the camera, the lens cracking on the stone. Miles, however, stood rooted in place, his face pale but his eyes shining with something darker than fear. Obsession. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what we came for." The nun's head snapped toward him, her eyes like empty pits, her scream rising into a pitch that shook the very walls of the church. The chain snapped free from the floor. And with that sound, the nightmare truly began. The chains clattered against the stone floor as the nun dragged herself forward, her scream echoing in every corner of the church. Dust shook loose from the rafters, candles toppled from broken stands, and the very walls seemed to pulse with her fury. Emma staggered back until her shoulders struck the locked doors. She clawed at them desperately, but the iron remained unmoving. Jordan scrambled for the fallen camera, but the screen only flickered with static. When the lens briefly cleared, it showed not the church but another place entirely. A room lit by dozens of candles, priests chanting, a young nun strapped to the floor as her body writhed in agony. It was the exorcism, the one that had failed. The footage wasn't live. It was a memory. "She's showing us what happened," Jordan gasped. Emma's eyes filled with horror. The priests on the screen had encircled the nun with holy symbols, chains anchoring her wrists and ankles. But their voices faltered as her screams grew louder. One priest collapsed, another clawed at his own eyes, and the camera shook violently before the image broke. Miles stepped closer, his voice trembling but steady with fascination. She was too strong. They couldn't finish it. The nun's head jerked violently, bones snapping with the sound of breaking branches. Her chains dragged forward, sparks striking stone. Her scream shifted into words that clawed at their sanity. "No one leaves until it is finished." Emma fell to her knees, tears streaking her cheeks. "What does she want from us?" Miles didn't hesitate. "She wants us to finish what they couldn't. That's why she's showing us this. She's been trapped in between for decades." Jordan shook his head violently. No way. We can't exorcise anything. We're not priests. We're just filmmakers." The nun lunged, her chains snapping forward like whips. One struck a pew, shattering it into splinters. Another wrapped around the tripod, dragging it into the shadows. The equipment sparked and died. The red recording lights extinguished one by one until only Jordan's cracked camera flickered weakly. Emma screamed as one of the chains lashed across her leg, slicing through flesh. She collapsed, blood spreading across the cold stone. Jordan rushed to her side, but Miles didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the altar, on the broken symbols scorched into the ground. "If we restore them, if we finish the ritual, maybe she'll let us go," he muttered. The nun turned her hollow gaze on him, as if acknowledging his words. Emma's voice was ragged with pain. "Miles, you don't know the rite. You don't know the words." But Miles was already kneeling, using a shard of broken wood to trace the symbols into the stone. His hands shook, sweat dripping into his eyes. He whispered fragments of prayers he half remembered from childhood, stringing them together in desperation. The nun shrieked, her chains thrashing wildly, but she did not strike him. Instead, she seemed to wait. Jordan dragged Emma toward the wall, his breaths coming fast. "He's going to get us all killed." The air thickened, the smell of iron and rot filling their lungs. The crucifix above the altar cracked again, splitting down the middle as if the church itself rejected what was happening. Miles shouted louder, his voice breaking. "Deliver us from evil! Sancte Michael Arcangele! Defende-nos!" The nun screamed, the sound so piercing it shattered the stained glass that remained in the windows. Shards rained down like falling stars, slicing into the floor. Jordan shielded Emma with his body, blood seeping from fresh cuts. Then, the chains stopped. They hung motionless in the air, trembling as though held back by unseen hands. The nun's scream faltered into silence. She stared at Miles, her hollow eyes unsamam, blinking. For a moment, hope flickered, and then the symbols Miles had carved began to smoke. One by one, they blackened and crumbled, as if burned away from within. The nun laughed, a low guttural sound that did not belong to any human throat. Miles froze. His makeshift ritual was nothing. The church swallowed his prayers whole, twisting them into mockery. The nun surged forward, chains wrapped around Miles's throat, lifting him into the air. His face turned purple as he clawed at the iron links, his screams muffled by the tightening grip. With one violent snap, the chains dragged him into the shadows, his body vanishing with a final sickening crack. Emma shrieked. Jordan clutched her tightly, tears burning his eyes. "We have to find another way. Now!" The doors loomed behind them, but the locks remained firm. The windows were nothing but shards. The only way out was through the altar, through the nun. Jordan picked up the broken camera. Its screen flickered again, showing the exorcism room once more. The priests were gone now. Only the nun remained, still chained, still screaming. And then she turned her head, on the screen, and looked directly at him. "Finish it, or join me." The church erupted into chaos. The chains whipped, the floor split, and the crucifix crashed to the ground in a storm of splinters. Emma and Jordan clung to each other as the world fell apart around them. The last thing the camera captured before the screen went black was the nun's face, inches from the lens, her mouth stretching into an inhuman grin. When the townspeople found the church weeks later, they discovered only shattered equipment, dried blood, and a single camera still recording on loop. The footage was corrupted, but one image remained clear. The nun chained to the altar, her eyes wide open, waiting for the next witnesses,